In today's episode, you might notice a few different bits and pieces. Firstly, glasses. Next thing, new workshop, new house. And last but not least, we got a shop dog who's just about to go to sleep, I reckon. Say hi, Casper. So, the focus of today's episode is going to be on the leak that a lot of E30s have into the passenger's footwell, or maybe if you're in America, the driver's footwell, from the pipes that go to the heater core through the firewall. So let's get stuck into that. So this is just going to be a short video explaining how I went through and stopped all the leaks from happening on the car into the leaking coolant into the footwell. These valves in particular are bloody expensive, so I want to do a DIY on it because I do not want to be paying the $300 and something US for a new valve and pipe setup. It's not really going to make a difference what engine you've got in the car. If you're running a heater, you're probably going to be running this valve and these pipes. I have modified the end of the pipe slightly, but not really relevant to what I'm talking about here. The second thing that you need to think about in regards to water leaking into the footwell is the valve here. So I've got this one apart, but basically in the car, this sits something like that, and it's got some rivets that go through and hold that all together. This is the valve that controls the flow of water through the heater core. So that's got a little electrical connection at the top there, and quite often, and in my case, water leaks out of here, and mine was doing it very slowly but enough to notice. So leak a bit of coolant out here onto the floor. So obviously I need to fix that. In my travels, I've come across two different types of valves. So this is the later model one that was in my car. It's got like this plunger on it. It did have like a skirt that went to the outside, but mine was all it all dissolved basically when I pulled this out. So that's one type there. This is another type. It's got this like spring on the end, which I'm guessing pulled on something inside the pipe there and stopped the flow. This one had an O-ring in it. This one didn't seem to have one that I could find. Maybe the skirt that came off here stopped the water coming out. Obviously, in my case, it wasn't stopping the water coming out, so I need to do something about fixing that. However, I think my fix for both of them is going to be pretty much the same sort of thing. So first thing you're going to want to do is grab a 3.5mm drill bit and drill out the end of these, which sit basically, they sit like through there. So just put a drill in there and just drill them out. You only need to drill just a very little bit, take the end off them, and then you can pull it apart. Next thing you're going to want to get is some O-rings. So I've got a couple of different ones here. This is a really thick one, probably too thick. You've got to be careful with how far the plunger's got to travel, so you don't want to create too much room there, so that it can actually still go out and block the hole. So that one's out. This one's a bit too big. This one's just right to go in there. Next thing you're going to want is some really small bolts. These are 3mm, and I've got lock washers or nylock nuts and normal washers to suit. This fits perfectly through there, and I'm going to be able to use that in place of the original sort of rivet thing, because obviously I can't get any of these, so this will clamp it back down on the O-ring in here, creating hopefully a nice tight seal that's going to stop any coolant from escaping. So here we are, all done. You can see the bolts in there. This one has these bolts have a Phillips head on them, and they actually fit into those recesses quite well. On this side you've got just a single washer and a nylock nut. These, you don't really need to do them very tight at all. This is actually quite normally what you'd consider quite loose, but all it needs to do is squash down the O-ring enough that it seals it. And I noticed if you tighten them up too much, the corners on the grey bit there, they actually start pulling in. So I'd be concerned about longevity if you did them too tight. And obviously if you do them really tight, you're going to break the edges off them. It sits kind of like this, about that distance standard. So I think that the plunger that goes out into the plastic hole to lock it all up. Should be in about the right spot still. So it's all works pretty well. Hopefully that still works. I did the old thing where you put your mouth over one end and plug the other end with your hand. And when I originally did it, before I pulled it all apart, you could feel that it would just slowly lose pressure. And I had a very slight leak from mine, so that kind of makes sense, where now it doesn't lose pressure at all. So hopefully it'll all be good in the car. Didn't take too long to do. These bolts and nuts are tiny, so they are a bit finicky, but not too bad. You do need to make sure that you've got a tiny little socket or something like that, or you can just use, I just used pliers on that end and then the screwdriver on the other to tighten them all up. Didn't take too long. Took about the time for this guy to go from running around like an idiot to asleep on the garage floor, so about 45 minutes. Good little job to do on the weekend. And the O-rings and the bolts, honestly, they probably cost me about $5. It's mainly just the pain in the ass of pulling it out the car that's the problem, but at least it's cheap, I guess. So yet another little modification done to get the car over inspection. I've been quite busy moving houses recently. Also went to the new track at Tailem Bend in the drift car slash, I guess, track car now. So that's been fun. I basically haven't touched this thing in probably about 4 months. Been driving it not quite a bit. I've been driving it a little bit. It's not my daily, so it doesn't get driven heaps, but drive it around the place, and it's got a few little bits and pieces, like the starter really needs to be replaced. It doesn't love life. I've got the brake booster on the bench at the moment because it's had some issues that I'll probably go into a bit deeper next episode, but we are getting to it, and hopefully this thing will be legal by about October. Hopefully.